folks, and welcome to our latest episode of Tea Time Talks with MDRP. I'm Anushree Srivastava, the creator of Medical Devices Regulatory Professionals, an exclusive LinkedIn group for all your regulatory concerns. I bring to you experts from the devices industry as we talk about some key topics in the regulatory space. I have with me today John Bergsteinson, who is an industry expert in the medical devices sector and will be talking to me about a crucial aspect of clinical data requirement for medical devices, that is, post-market clinical follow-up, or PMCF. Hello, John, and welcome to the discussion. Let's hear about your regulatory background in the devices space.
Hi, Anushree. Thanks for having me. So I'm a biomedical engineer in the background, and for the past 7 years, I've dedicated my career towards helping MedTech with clinical data collection. I'm the co-founder and former CTO of SmartTrial, and I've focused on clinical data and quality assurance, safety, and compliance around the clinical data collection field for MedTech. And since 2017, I've been leading the global business development, where I primarily help medtech companies to bridge the gap between their devices and clinical data out in the market. And for those of you that don't know SmartTrial, we're the only tailor-made electronic data capture platform for medtech, which is designed to help companies comply with the regulatory requirements on clinical evidence by helping them improving the collection and management of clinical data. For the past 2-3 years or so, with the MDR becoming a very, very interesting topic within the medtech field, we've been assisting companies preparing their PMCF plans and data collection in the post-market setting and try to figure out what works best and what doesn't. So I'm happy to be here with you today to discuss some of these points here, because this is very relevant for companies that are approaching or have products in the European Union market.
All right, thank you, John. I'm excited to begin our discussion. I remember that our paths crossed for the first time, virtually of course, when you had posted about PMCF needs for devices on LinkedIn. I'm glad that you'll be sharing your expertise on this topic with our listeners today.
Of course.
All right, guys, without further ado, post-market clinical follow-up is a continuous process that is put in place for medical devices. Once the devices are cleared for marketing in specific geographies, the device manufacturers are required to collect data pertaining to the performance and safety of these devices. Continuous monitoring of the device is largely referred to as post-market surveillance. There are two types of surveillance that is done. First is post-market vigilance, which is a reactive process wherein device outcomes are monitored through sources like literature articles, complaint systems, MDRs and MDVs reportable events, and more. It is reactive in the sense that the events have already occurred and the manufacturer monitors and performs investigational analysis to arrive at root cause for the occurrence. To sum it up, vigilance relates to a more corrective approach. PMCF, on the other hand, is a proactive process in nature. In PMCF, manufacturers plan activities that will serve to monitor the device's performance and safety post-market release. Through these activities, the manufacturers proactively undertake tasks to monitor device use in a real-world clinical setting and provide continuous assessment of the device's performance and safety profiles. So, John, PMCF is a broad topic, and its applicability extends across the device classification spectrum. What are the main questions that a manufacturer should look to answer while planning the PMCF process for a device?
So when it comes to PMCF, post-market clinical follow-up is all about demonstrating the device's safety and performance out in the market and feeding that continuously into your clinical evaluation and technical file for those devices. So what I believe everyone should be asking themselves is, first of all, how do I measure my device's performance? Second of all, how do I measure my device's safety? And thirdly, how do I demonstrate these parameters? And when I say demonstrate, I am actually meaning, how do I include scientific justifications or numbers or graphical illustrations that can support our answers to these questions. And the answers to these questions should result in you defining some kind of a clinical outcome variable or a map of indications that could help you exemplify your device's safety and performance out in the market. So I think the most important thing to note here is that you have to have a clear goal of how you can demonstrate your device safety and performance.
Right, absolutely. And I think also when we talk about PMCF, how important is it to consider the device safety and performance throughout the lifetime? Because sometimes manufacturers go for these small scale studies as post-market studies where they are probably running the study for a year, whereas the shelf life of the device could be 5 years. So is that justified?
Good point. The lifetime of a device relates a lot to what device you have, what device data you have to support that lifetime of the device. So if you'd like to market that device as being a 10-year lifetime implantable device, you would have to have some data to support it. And that is one of the biggest changes to the MDR from what we had in the past, is that you now have to demonstrate that what you're saying is true. It's not enough to just say it and have done extensive benchmark testing on it.
Exactly, yes, and I completely agree with you there. Great, thank you, John. Moving on. For device manufacturers, how do the PMCF activities vary with device class? For example, if I have a low-risk class 1 device versus a high-risk class 3 device, what are the considerations and specific activities that I need to account for as a manufacturer to plan my PMCF process?
So this is a good question because, of course, a Band-Aid shouldn't have to go through the same process as a high-risk implantable class 3 device. It doesn't really make sense. If you have a medical device, some of the activities that you should be focusing on in PMCF context do vary a little bit depending on the device classification. And I actually had our team draft up a good overview of this of these standard reports that are required from the MDR depending on different device classifications. And we can share this with the audience as well. But what that entails, for example, is that when you have a low class device, you should focus on doing your post-market surveillance report, and you don't have to update your summary of safety clinical performance or periodic safety update report, because that is not required. But when you get to higher classes like 2A, 2B, and 3, you don't have to do a PMS report, but you have to focus on doing a periodic safety report or summary of safety and clinical performance. And these reports, they're different depending on what device class you have in terms of how often you have to update these. So for example, if you have a class 3 device, these have to be updated annually. And if you have implantable device, you have to conduct the summary of safety and clinical performance. But when you have the 2A to B, there are different requirements for the periodic safety update reports, such as you don't have to update that more than every other year. So there are certain differences in terms of what reports you have to do and so on. When it comes to the activities, the MDR doesn't really specify what activity you should conduct, or as the MDR Annex 14 says, what methods, specific or general methods you should conduct. It highlights that you have to be able to demonstrate data that is included in this report. So what that entails is that you will need to define what generic and specific methods or activities to include in your PMCF plan, depending on the data you need to collect. So whether you should conduct a survey or a registry or a post-market clinical investigation of some sort, all comes back to answering the questions that I mentioned before. What data is it that I need to collect to demonstrate my device clinical performance and safety? And how do I want to present that? And when you have found that out, you'll be able to identify whether you should conduct a survey or a study or a registry, because these activities of different methods, they will return different outcomes, of course.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that, John. But I have come across medical device manufacturers who say have a class 3 high risk device, and they feel that they are able to justify all performance and safety issues through a simple physician user survey, which talks about how easy it is to use the device and how the patient outcomes in terms of complications over a period of time do not differ significantly from the risk analysis that they have performed. And I feel that for a class 3 device, of course, notwithstanding the regulations, but like there are more robust forms of PMCF sources that are required, and a simple survey, even though it is providing answers, it's still not a good way. We should be able to demonstrate some sort of control studies to show that the device is actually providing adequate benefit. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's true. Because if you think about it, if a clinical performance parameter for a class 3 implantable device is depending on the I don't know, number of years that this patient can survive, or whatever it might be, and conducting a survey and asking a physician is not going to be able to demonstrate that. That is demonstrated by doing continuous follow-ups on that subject. So a one-time survey is not going to be able to demonstrate that clinical performance. And again, that's again what people often misunderstand, is that you need to define what clinical outcome measures support your clinical performance. And conducting a survey and asking a physician how many people have survived is not going to be able to support that, because that data could also just have been generated by sending an Excel file over and have somebody type in any kind of number. And when your notified body asks you, okay, so how many subjects were there? Where did they come from? Can you name the hospitals, or can you come up with some examples? You won't be able to do that. And so the notified body will be able to say, well, I'm going to challenge you on that, and I'm going to deem that data unreliable. You will have to conduct another type of activity to be able to demonstrate that. So it's all about being able to prove that you can trace the origin of the data that you're using to support your clinical performance back to some kind of a subject in that sense.
Right, absolutely. I think I agree with that a lot. And also, manufacturers probably need to realize that PMCF is not a shortcut to showing any sort of reliability on the device, but it is one of the most crucial pillars that's keeping your device in the market. And there should be no need to cut corners when you're planning PMCF activities, because at the end of the day, this is what is going to convince the notified body to keep your device in the market. Right. Okay, so moving on to some more challenging concepts. Within the same device class, how does the PMCF approach change for novel versus established devices? I ask this because established devices have a lot of data. There's like these are legacy devices, everybody knows about them. And novel devices, of course, are those which do not have a lot of literature for them. So how are we going to approach the PMCF differently for these devices?
That's a very good question. When it comes to PMCF, we have to remember that the focus is always the same: to demonstrate, to update your clinical evaluation to be able to continuously demonstrate clinical performance and safety out in the market. Established devices, most of the time, have been claiming equivalence to get to market. And when it comes to novel devices or new treatment methods, equivalence will change a little bit, especially when it comes to post-market activities, because there's a small sentence in the Annex 14 that says that a medical device manufacturer will have to demonstrate that they have clear access to the data that they're using to claim equivalence. So the established devices or legacy devices, that doesn't mean that they have to conduct full-blown clinical investigations in a post-market setting. If they've all been claiming equivalence and they can support that their vigilance reporting and so on has shown positive results, the proof of burden for performance and safety is a little bit less, so the type of activities that you initiate in your PMCF plan are maybe not as heavy as it would be with a novel device. With a novel device, the proof of burden for clinical performance and safety is a little bit heavier because you don't have any data from the literature or past activities that you can rely on. So your PMCF activities will have to focus on activities such as clinical investigations or intervention studies where the burden of proof for your performance and safety is a little bit more, well, it's a little bit more difficult. So in that sense, the biggest difference between those is the type of proactive activities that you would initiate to confirm the clinical performance and safety out of the market.
Right, absolutely. And I'm thinking that if my device, suppose again class 2B or class 3 device, it has been an established device and there are a lot of clinical study articles, a lot of information that is justifying its use. Can I then use this as a way to say that I do not need any PMCF activities for this because it's been in the market for so long and the complaint data and the clinical literature, everything looks beautiful for it?
Well, if you have access to that data, you might be able to minimize some of the proactive activity that you need to conduct, but you still need to conduct a PMCF. The question of whether you need to conduct a PMCF, investigation or not is a different question, though.
Right. Okay. Great. Now, this is one of my favorite points. A lot of times we come across devices that are serving as an accessory function, say guiding sheets or guide wires. It can be challenging to set safety and performance endpoint for such devices, and I'm wondering if the PMCF considerations change for them, especially because when it even comes to clinical literature, these devices do not get any spotlight, if you know what I mean, because they are serving an accessory function, and unless the study is specifically focused on the delivery of interventional devices using a guide wire or guiding catheter, the authors are not going to really talk about this. They are only going to focus on the primary device and the procedure being done. So when we analyze the scientific literature for such devices, we do not find any outcomes that are directly attributable to the devices. So I'm trying to think, how do manufacturers go about designing the PMCF for such devices?
Well, this is a very tricky question, but when you, for example, think of guide wires, for example, the clinical performance parameter is highly related to the procedure that they used for. So most, for example, guide wires, they work in the same way. They have the same, capabilities, the same similar structure and so on. So it can be very, very difficult to deem a device clinical performance is X, Y, or Z related to the different procedures that you used it, because that can vary quite a lot. So there might be cases where this could be possible to make exempted from PMCF in one way or another, but you still have to conduct some post-market surveillance on that. You have to make sure that that post-market surveillance is then initiated through some literature reviews and proactive, maybe retrospective safety reporting as well. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with you. And also, I'm thinking that if I were a manufacturer of a device which had some sort of an accessory function, I would probably try to establish its safety based on the literature, especially by rules of elimination, where I would probably say that since the authors have not described any issue with the initial procedure of delivering interventional devices or such, or if I say that so many patients reach the final endpoint, that means even though the authors haven't explicitly mentioned that the guide wire performed well, but without that performance going successful, the final procedure wouldn't have been done. So probably I'm going to highlight that. And when it comes to PMCF, of course, I'm going to stick more to what my labeling says, especially for safety. So if I've put, say, death as a part of my potential risk for the devices, then I think I'm going to try and evaluate outcomes in patients to see the mortality rate in patients who have used my device for any sort of interventional procedure. And because there is no direct attribution for this particular device, I'm going to consider any death outcome as related to my device and then sort of go back to my risk management and analysis.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess when it comes down to it, it's all about indicating that the safety is still in order, and then trying to link the performance to the procedures that have been documented on using the device.
Right, exactly. Excellent. Okay, now this is a persistent question that I get from a lot of device manufacturers because everybody wants the easy way out, I suppose. But John, I want to understand from you, what qualifies to be a good justification for not performing any PMCF studies? And I'm talking about no registry, no survey, and relying completely on your post-market vigilance data.
Oh, this is a so good question because, well, I would start by saying, well, it depends. It depends on your, first of all, it depends on your notified body. It depends on your device classification, and it depends on your, well, existing clinical evaluation reports. So I don't think there's a good answer to this because you have to take a look at every single case for itself. And we just have to remember that every medical device manufacturer has to conduct a PMCF, and if not, they will have to document why there should not, why they should be exempt for conducting PMCF. But that does not mean that you have to conduct a PMCF study. So you could continue using literature or other information sources to gather information on your device's clinical performance and safety out of the market. But in the end, you have to be able to demonstrate that your device still safely performs and is still safe while it's out there in the market. So I would find it very difficult to say we don't have to demonstrate our safety or we don't have to demonstrate clinical performance because of X, Y, or Z. Because in most cases, medical devices will always have to do that. So I guess the questions we should be asking us, do we have enough information or data to already prove that we don't need to demonstrate that clinical performance safety? If we do, we might be able to document and say that we don't have to conduct any PMCF studies. If we do not have any data to support that, you will have to conduct some kind of an activity to be able to demonstrate that.
Right, exactly. And I think this is a point that probably we need to make more device manufacturers aware, because even with the upcoming MDR implementation, I do see that a lot of device manufacturers believe that their device has a lot of data in the public domain as well, and they don't require any PMCF studies. And on my part, I always encourage them to at least consider doing some sort of a usability survey or something to support the existing vigilance data that they have, because even if they have consistently got low complaint rates, I think that relates a lot to the overall usage, and there should be something on the PMCF side as well to show that you are proactively doing something to ensure that your device remains safe and provides benefit to the patient.
Exactly, yeah. Because even though you have a legacy device in the market, you have a lot of data, and things do change, procedures change, the healthcare develops, the healthcare systems develop, and the methods for treating subjects also changes and develop. And you might see cases where devices have been used in one way for 30 years. Suddenly, when the newest treatment method requires a change in the treatment pathway, the device might be applied differently as well. And thus it could start indicating higher rates of safety risks. So if you're not proactively following up on that, you might suddenly start seeing an increase in safety issues with your device, which might be related to the procedures having changed and your device hasn't changed in that regard because it's just a legacy device. So that's where PMCF comes into place. That's the goal of the PMCF, to tackle the forgotten devices as well that might impose new risks or potential new, off-label usages that could pose new potential risks to patients in the market as well.
Exactly. I completely agree with that. So with that, thank you so much, John, for an extremely productive discussion on PMCF requirements. I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and as listeners will benefit tremendously from the pointers shared by you. And overall, I think this is also going to give them a clearer picture for anyone looking for guidance on this topic. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for having this talk today. It's very important to share a variety of opinions on this particular topic. It's something that a lot of companies are having challenges with right now, and as the MDR gets closer and closer, I think it's important that we share more and more guidance with the rest of the industry. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. And it was our honor to have you today. Well, that's all that we have for today, folks. We'll be seeing you again for another discussion on another critical topic in medical devices regulatory compliance. This is Anushri at the Medical Devices Regulatory Professionals, signing off on this session of Tea Time Talks with MDRP.